Kalafalaya to Talafalava and warm Pacific greetings to all our viewers. We are so happy to have you join us for this special Talanoa on climate loss and damage. I'm Esther Pavihi, and I hope you will join us as we talk about a topic that touches every Pacific community.
That's right, Esther. Esther, today we are here to we bring together voices from across our Blue Pacific, sharing insights, challenges and solutions from the front line of climate negotiations to lived realities of our people. This panel is about weaving a shared vision for just and a resilient future.
Thank you for that, Edno. We also want to acknowledge our esteemed panelists. We start with Ms. Tangaloa Cooper, who has spent a large part of her career with the Pacific Regional Environment Program, SPREP, here in Samoa. And joining her is the president of, and joining Tangaloa is our friend from Palau, who is the head of climate division at the president's office in Palau. And we are so happy to have Xavier Matsutaro join us tonight. Also with us is Vanuatu's lead climate advisor and negotiator, Dr. Christopher Bartlett. And of course, no stranger to Samoa, we have our beautiful Miss Brianna Fruin join us as well, and she will be part of the global youth group that are leading the action this year at COP30 in Brazil. As for Edno and me, and our colleagues here in the media team, we are part of this journey. We are very much part of this journey, including the inaugural Pacific Youth Dialogue on Loss and Damage and the Pacific Regional Dialogue on Loss and Damage 2025, both held here in Samoa this week and also last week. These dialogues bring together the Pacific governments, youth, civil society, academia, NGOs, and the private sector to collectively advance our region's priorities on loss and damage. As you are aware, Pacific leaders have acknowledged that climate change is the single greatest threat to the Pacific region and confirmed that climate change threatens the livelihood, security, and well-being of our people and ecosystems, backed, of course, by the latest science and the lived realities of the people of the Pacific. Under the 2050 strategy for the Blue Pacific continent, Pacific leaders have set out a new framework for securing our future, including a major climate change-related goal, and that is that all Pacific people live safe, secure, and prosperous lives, resilient to the impacts of climate change and natural disasters. The region remains a global leader on climate action, and to unpack some of that, we are joined today by 4 of our distinguished guests who are among more than 150 delegates attending this week's Climate Roundtable in Samoa. Whawhetai tele lava, shall we begin? All right, I would begin with you, Tangaloa, because you're sitting right next to me onto my left here. Let's go on this climate journey and tell us some of the key themes of the roundtable this week in Samoa. Well, of course, with the specific question as to what loss and damage looks like for our people in the dialogues that you've hosted this week.
Thank you, and whalafulohia too. We expected 150 participants this week, and today we had a count of just over 200. So there's been a lot of interest. We see this as the Pacific Climate Week. And really, it's kicked off with a Youth Pacific Dialogue on Loss and Damage, which was designed to unpack what loss and damage means, what are economic losses and damage, and what are non-economic loss and damage. And then the major outcome of the Youth Dialogue has been a development of a declaration, and that is a statement of what the Pacific youth, young people view as their priorities, and also a call to arms on loss and damage. The themes for the round table this week center on mitigation, just transition, adaptation, and of course loss and damage, but not limited to those key thematic areas. Also important, and something that has been central to all of the discussions, is climate finance. How do Pacific countries access climate finance at scale, and the opportunities that lie in the different modalities, as well as bilateral arrangements. This week, as you've said, Esther, there's just a plethora of different people who are here, but all with the same purpose, and that is to see and serve the Pacific in its climate change ambition. Also important, and my key takeaway from the Loss and Damage Dialogue for the Youth, and also the Loss and Damage Dialogue that concluded yesterday for the Pacific, has been a real focus on non-economic losses and damage, and in particular traditional knowledge, communities, identity, and things like that. And so the next 2 days are going to really unpack the Pacific's priorities, and then bring to the fore at the end, and then it will conclude with a donors dialogue. So we have donors here in Apia as well, and it's an opportunity for our countries to stand toe-to-toe with them, to ask them the direct questions, and to also hear directly from them of the opportunities. And so really the platform is a convening of the Pacific climate change community to advance the priorities of the Pacific. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Tangaloa. We also saw and we felt the emotion that was in the room when the delegates were talking about the non-economic loss. But I'll pivot to you now, in Eddie. You can ask some of our seasoned journalists who are here with us tonight if they would like to pose their questions.
Thank you, and thank you, Tangaloa, for that brief. It is the opportunity for you Pacific journalists to pose questions on that conversation that we had on loss and damage. I am now going to ask you to ask a couple of questions to our panelists.
My question is directed to Director Tangaloa Cooper. Given the last week and this week's dialogue on loss and damage here, and the recent ICJ developments, what concrete time-bound steps do you now expect wealthy emitters, multilateral funds, and regional institutions to take in the next 12 to 14 months?
Thank you. That's a great question. On the concrete steps, we know that the ICJ opinion now puts large emitters on notice. It's a clear indication from the highest court of the world that large emitters can be held accountable for climate change damage, for climate change impacts on small countries, on Pacific countries. Regarding what regional organizations can do, I mean, in the next 12 to 24 months, is the regional organizations that convene under the One Crop mechanism as a family will unpack the outcomes of the two dialogues, the outcomes of the Pacific Climate Change Roundtable, and look at actionable items that we can take forward as organizations, but also in partnership with our governments. And for the multilateral fund partners who are in town, and in particular the Fund for Loss and Damage, they will have a clear message from the Pacific on the types of applications that they will receive for loss and damage. What I think we need to remember is, whilst economic losses and damage can be measured, it's the non-economic, like traditional knowledge, and communities that have to move that you can't measure. And so that's going to be a challenge not just for countries and communities, but also for our organizations that work to serve our countries in the Pacific. It's also going to be it will be a test of the fund as well.
Can we have another question from members of the media, please?
Bula, I'm Sanjashni from Fiji. My question is directed to Xavier. Beyond the immediate impacts of climate disasters, what strategies is Palau exploring to address the hidden or long-term losses?
It all comes to the evidence and collecting data. So we've been working really hard to deploy environmental instrumentation all around to validate what has already been observed. Nowadays, it's really about the evidence. So we've been deploying, now in the process of deploying tide gauges, wave buoys, tying them to atmospheric data through our weather service. And the next step is to tie and link them all together. So you get a broad view of what it's looking like now, the patterns, the historical trends, and doing a bit of climate modeling on how that may look like in the next 15, 20, 50 years. But then that needs to be merged with the local experience and the traditional knowledge that exists, mainly because data will only get you so far. So you gotta tie it to the lived experience. You bring that two together, then you can start systemizing how L&D and adaptation will look like in the short, medium, and long term.
Thank you for that insightful response. I think before going further, I'd like to provide this opportunity for Dr. Chris and Brianna to provide brief reflections on the journey during the past discussions.
Thank you very much for this question. And I think my response is going to focus on this journey that we've just undertaken when it comes to the International Court of Justice. So most of the Pacific would know that we've just come out of an historic ruling called an advisory opinion from the world's highest court. So this is the United Nations judicial system that can resolve the most complex challenges and questions when it comes to international law. So what this court can do is it can actually solve disputes between two countries, but it can also answer questions about international law. Now, obviously, we in the Pacific for a long time have been saying that states, countries, those who are emitters of greenhouse gases, need to be doing a lot more than they're doing right now. And our view is that the Climate Change Treaty, the Paris Agreement, these are just a couple of those international laws that states have to abide by when it comes to protecting the climate system. So what we've done, the Pacific has done, is brought a question to the court. Two questions, actually. The first question is, what are the obligations that all states have to abide by to protect the climate system? And the second question is a follow-on. What happens when states breach those obligations, when they break those rules? Very simple questions, but transformational answers. So this process actually started with our young people in the Pacific, and I'll let Brianna talk a lot about that. But once the young people asked countries like Vanuatu to take this to the court, because only states can do that, Vanuatu really launched a pretty amazing process to get all countries in the world to agree to ask this question. So we had to go to the United Nations General Assembly and get all parties to say, yeah, this is a worthwhile question to ask the highest court in the world. And it took about 1.5 years of presentations to the court and statements and witness testimony. And finally, just this year in July, the court came out with their advisory opinion. What did the court say? Surprisingly, or not so surprisingly for the Pacific, the court said states have to follow a lot of international rules and treaties, not just the Paris Agreement, not just the UN Convention on Climate Change, but all the treaties related to human rights and protecting the environment and protecting the oceans. All of that is related to climate change rules and regulations. That's the first most important ruling. Second, what was amazing is the court said this whole idea of keeping temperature below a threshold is absolutely legally binding. And what's that temperature threshold? The same thing that the Pacific has been saying for decades, 1.5 degrees. Nothing more about 2 degrees or we try our best. Every action has to be to keep this planet below 1.5 degrees of warming. The court also came out with a really important statement around the cause of climate change and the actions required to stop it. We know what the cause is: fossil fuel-driven greenhouse gas emissions. And the court made it very clear that if a state is not doing everything that it can to control greenhouse gas emissions from fossil fuel production, fossil fuel exploration, fossil fuel licensing, and fossil fuel subsidies, then they are very likely committing an internationally wrongful act. They are breaking international law. What happens when you break international law? Well, the court said, without a doubt, you will be held accountable, and that means that you could be required to pay compensation for those that you've harmed and caused injury to. So who has been harmed more than anybody else on this planet because of climate change? We in the Pacific Islands. And that means this opens the door to a whole range of litigation options where we in the Pacific can take those countries to court and say, you have caused us damage, you have caused us loss, and therefore you will be held legally liable. So an incredible process that we've just gone through, and a huge congratulations to all who've been involved, all of the diplomats, all of the lawyers, and of course to the young people who started this campaign back in Vanuatu. And let me give to Brianna now to talk about that, how that started.
Thank you so much to Dr. Christopher, who explained just the remarkable feat that was achieved with this advisory opinion. And I think that this was really an example of intergenerational solidarity that worked. And I really want to give my heartfelt thank you to the Pacific Island students fighting climate change, because this blossomed from a dream out of a classroom in the Pacific Islands. And it showed the world that the thoughts of young Pacific people within classrooms, within villages, on mats, in faleo'os, in bures, in canoes, is so valuable. And it will be the thoughts and the dreams that hold big polluters accountable. And so polluters should be scared of these young people. And I know they are. And I think now more than ever, the fact that this advisory opinion came out on our side, that we should be well organized, because we know that they are organizing against us. And so it is time for Pacific Islands to not only be in solidarity with each other as governments, but be in solidarity with our young people. It's time for intergenerational dialogue, inclusion of groups like Pacific Island students fighting climate change in the roundtables, in decision-making processes, in negotiation, because we've seen this year that this type of process works. And this should be the process that we use moving forward to save our Pacific Islands.
Thank you so much for that, Brianna. And if any of you out there are doubting the future of the Pacific, you can rest assured that the young people that we have seen this week and last week, they have this together. So our future as the Pacific region is safe in their capable hands. We'll now run to our nice-looking crop of journalists, seasoned journalists from the region. Let's start with you, Inoke. A question about the decision from the International Court of Justice, and perhaps we can ask Dr. Chris Bartlett first. Thanks.
Honorable gentleman, honorable Dr. Chris. Yesterday, Dr. Chris, you had emphasized, now that we have achieved this remarkable feat, the actioning part of the whole ICAJ advisory opinion. How should we, or how could we ensure that small island states retain ownership of this advisory opinion and it isn't misinterpreted or co-opted by bigger players in the region?
Excellent question. Let me be really clear what this advisory opinion is. It is a clarification of law. This wasn't a court case where one country sued another country, there was a winner or a loser. That's not what happened. What the court gave us is absolute clarity on what is correct behavior and what is internationally wrongful behavior when it comes to climate change. So now that we have that clarity, it's completely up to us how we use it. So where we must use it, of course, is when we go to the climate negotiations. So what's going to happen at COP30 in just a few months' time? all the countries of the world are going to present these climate plans. We call them NDCs. And in those climate plans, they're going to tell us exactly what they're going to do to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement to keep the temperature below 1.5 degrees. Now, if we see in those climate plans that they're not meeting 1.5, or they're not managing fossil fuels, or they're not doing everything that they can to protect future generations, then we must call them out and say, you are breaking international law. You're breaching your obligations, and you will be held legally. That's our responsibility, to bring them to the legal line, which has now been set by the highest court. Not just in the climate negotiations, when we go to the environment discussions and we talk about the way that the oceans are being destroyed and our coral reefs are dying. We need to say the international court has made it clear that you cannot continue this behavior. We also need to think about those states which refuse to abide by international law. Some states have walked away from the Paris Agreement. Some countries say, we're done with Paris. Therefore, you go and live your lives and we hope you survive. That's unacceptable. And the court said, it doesn't matter if you're a member of the Paris Agreement. It doesn't matter if you walked away and you withdrew. You still are obliged to meet these protections in human rights law and in other international law. So we need to bring this as hard and as forcefully as we can, because gone are the days where they can negotiate away our future just because they decide not to participate in one treaty or another. So I think this is really now the opportunity for the Pacific to step up.
That is so very important, that the whole concept about everybody has a responsibility, right? Because we only have one planet, and we all have a responsibility to protect it. Let's go back to the journalists.
Talo Falava, my name is Rula from TV1 Samoa. My question is for Brianna. Brianna, when you first heard about the ICJ ruling, how did you feel?
I felt like the ruling was a lot of things took place for it to happen beyond our generation. The moment that our leaders decided that we needed an organization like SPRIP, the moment that our leaders decided to go and take 1.5 to Paris, the moment that our leaders stood their ground and said we need to hold the line in negotiations, because that gave the confidence for young people in the Pacific to say, well, if our leaders are courageous and they hold the line when it comes to international spaces, then we can too, and we can help them. And so when I heard the opinion, I was very proud. I was proud of the young people that sacrificed their time, a lot of them with their whole lives revolved around this. If you see a young man named Vishal, a young woman named Cynthia, who put so much effort into this advisory opinion, you know that they sacrificed a lot. And so I was very proud of them. I was proud of our young people, but I was also very grateful for the path that was blazed by our elders in the space of climate justice and environmental justice.
Thank you. And my last question is, what has taught us about partnering with the youth?
Yes, I believe that this was a case where it was revealed the importance of intergenerational dialogue, intergenerational strategy of how we can bring about justice. And I think that it shows that our leaders need to work with us. And so we also mentioned on the panel that there was the Pacific Youth Dialogue on Loss and Damage, where there was an outcome statement. We have the Pacific Island Forum coming up. You know, this is a good time for our Pacific Island leaders to be reading this declaration and endorsing this declaration, so that we know when our young people are sharing their thoughts and also their own commitments to the work that they're willing to do, because Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change showed that young people are not only speaking, they're doing the work. The young people at this Loss and Damage Dialogue, they're ready to do the work too, and they're waiting on endorsements from our leaders so that we know that we can work together and there's commitment there.
Back to you. We'll take one more question from you, Enoke.
I think, my question is for Dr. Kreese. Brianna had just mentioned about forum leaders going into meeting next month in the Solomon Islands. Well, there's just a worry about the forum's foreign policy on friends to all and enemy to none. Do you think this principle could challenge Pacific leaders' ability to implement the ICJ advisory opinion and holding major fossil fuel emitters accountable?
So I think this week's roundtable is indicative of the way that we need to move forward on climate change. We cannot afford to divide ourselves. We must work with all partners to make sure that everybody takes every action possible. We know that in this region, some of the worst emitters are part of the forum. We also know that the only way to protect this planet and to protect lives in the Pacific is for those very same forum members to change their behavior. So I'm very confident that if we continue to work as a forum, if we continue to work with mutual respect and adhere to the rules of international law, we will be able to solve this crisis together. Nobody benefits from fossil fuels. Nobody benefits. Not the richest, not the highest emitters. Everybody will benefit from changing and transitioning in a just, fair, and equitable way to a non-fossil fuel-based society. So I have complete confidence that this ruling is going to actually help bring the world together and help us finally make the right decisions when it comes to emissions from fossil fuels.
Thank you for that, Dr. Chris. Over to you, Eddie.
Now let's talk about 1.5 campaign. So we've come through a lot on that, and I am going to seek your views, briefly your opinions on that topic, and that is what you thought and brought home when it comes to its realities, funding gaps, and community resilience. I'd like to start from that end, please.
1.5 is everything. We're already at 1.2 and we're seeing the damages being caused already. We can't afford to breach it. And I don't even want to go there on the beyond 1.5. Because even at this point, the resources that are needed to just cope is insurmountable. So we cannot afford to think beyond 1.5. We need to look at every leverage that we have, and we have one that was we got a very strong positive advisory opinion on, so we need to make those linkages. Also linkage with ITLOS as well, where through the PIF, we clarified that no country will lose its jurisdiction in the face of sea level rise. So all of these decisions, we can pool and leverage and push. I mean, that's really at the heart of it. We need to push because it's for our people. So from that standpoint, it's the reason why we are here and we advocate and we look for like-minded partners to see where we can make those leaps. And I think this is the opportunity to do it.
You've heard a lot said about 1.5, and it's something that for SPREP is not going away. It is a clear message from Pacific Islands. The call for 1.5 is a clear message because our very survival as Pacific people in the lands that our ancestors settled and grew nations, ultimately Pacific people don't want to move from what is our home. And so 1.5 is critical. It is the bedrock of all of our campaigns at SPREP, and it has reached millions of people. It involves media, it's social media, and we've had a large reach, but we can't stop. We have to keep talking about 1.5 degrees, a degree world to stay alive, and to do that, we've got to increase the heat on the campaign and on the messages that we put out so that it is not forgotten and so that people cannot move away from it. We will continue to campaign for 1.5 and in the work that we do, and we look to amplify the work that we do in 1.5 and really groundswell, a movement, so that to ensure that it is not forgotten and that it does not go away. 1.5 to stay alive.
That's right. 1.5 to stay alive and thrive.
So do you wanna?
I think what I would add on as well is that we know in order to meet the 1.5 target or stay below is that fossil fuels need to stay in the ground. And I think this is a good time to mention the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty, which has been an initiative that's been led by Vanuatu once again, that's been led by Pacific Islands. And we know, and we've heard it here on this panel tonight, we know the issue, we know the hand feeding climate change, and it is the fossil fuel industry. And even though we know that the impacts are getting worse, are getting more common, becoming more often in our Pacific Islands, we're still seeing this industry rake in record profits, expanding at rates that we know is absolutely destroying not only our islands, but the rest of this world. And so that is why a non-proliferation treaty is so necessary, but it also walks in the Pacific history of looking after the environment after the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And so this is a time for us to follow the ICJAO, the advisory opinion, with something like the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty to be able to say that, yes, 1.5 to stay alive is acknowledged and also achieved.
My reflection on 1.5 really is about this number as being something so terrifying that must be avoided at all costs. Right now, we haven't yet breached this 1.5 degree threshold. And look at how bad things are right now. If we get to 1.5 degrees in the Pacific, our lives are going to change irreversibly. 1.5 is when we lose our coral reefs. 1.5 is when all of the groundwater wells become salty. 1.5 is when thousands of communities across the Pacific are going to have to move to higher lands. 1.5 is when we have outbreaks of dengue and malaria that kill our people. 1.5 cannot happen. Science has told us for decades that if we reach 1.5, our lives change. And we are so close to breaching that terrifying threshold. And that is why every minute, every day, we have to push back against fossil fuel expansion. That is for the survival of this region of the planet.
Insightful responses there and reflections. I'm now going to give this opportunity to members of the Pacific media to ask one or two questions, please.
My question is to Brianna. The 1.5 target, 1.5 degrees Celsius target, is often discussed in terms of science and policies. But what innovative youth-led solutions have you seen that could help bridge the gap between global climate goals and the day-to-day realities in vulnerable Pacific communities?
Good question. The first time I actually heard of 1.5 was from a youth group in Marshall Islands called Jojikum. It was the first time that this idea or this campaign of 1.5 to stay alive was socialized, even with me as someone in climate work. And so I think that campaigns like this to raise awareness and to bridge the gap between tables like this and tables in an ordinary house in some island in the Pacific where a family's having dinner and they're experiencing the impacts of climate change, but they don't know what 1.5 means. That's why these campaigns are important. It's languaging, it's narrative, it's storytelling, it's bringing these may seem like political and scientific terms down to a grassroots level where actually these numbers, like as Dr. Christopher mentioned, they mean something to us and they will be very damaging to us. And so what I've been really encouraged by our young people is that they've taken on this job as not only messenger, but translator, translating what's happening in negotiation rooms, going and doing interviews, getting on social media lives, making TikToks, getting out there on social media so that the people back home in our islands and even just ordinary citizens in countries like America and Europe, they know what is happening in the Pacific and they know what terms like 1.5 mean. And we've seen it with 1.5. We've seen it with slogans like "We are not drowning, we are fighting." We've seen it with slogans from the advisory opinion like taking the world's biggest issue to the world's highest court. And then, of course, I feel like this year something we will hear again is hold the line. We need to be holding the line at COP. This will be languaging we hear again in a campaign that the Pacific can unite behind. And so that's what's really encouraged me, and that's what's inspired me, that's come from our young people, is this narrative change and reclaiming our power as Pacific people, as warriors.
We'll take the last question from the media, and then we'll pass it on to Esther.
My last question is to Dr. Chris again. Just on how the International Court of Justice advisory opinion could change the tactics in our campaign for 1.5 to stay alive, and how soon should we start implementing these to be in power of the 1.5 target?
All right. So often we think about global climate change as being everybody's problem. And it's true, the impacts are for everybody. But not everybody has caused climate change in the same way as everybody else. And so the International Court of Justice made it very clear that it is possible to use attribution science to say, you have caused more than you have. And therefore, you are more responsible for cleaning up your mess than you are. And so as we get closer and closer to 1.5, it's imperative that we start quantifying how much each country is responsible for compensating us here in the Pacific. And I think this is now probably one of the highest priorities for science, is to every event that happens, every cyclone, we say, how much of that is caused by you? And therefore, you must clean up the damages. So I think this is really going to bring, the advisory opinion is really going to bring some very cutting edge science to what we're using in the Pacific as we hold the line at COP30 and to keep us below 1.5.
Oh, is it me now, Ed? Okay, all right. We're coming down to the last question for the panel. And this question is really quite broad, but we'll start with you, Xavier. What does a just future look like for the Pacific region, in your view?
Staying below 1.5, first and foremost. And then the second thing is making sure that no one is left behind. And if, with all our efforts, start trying to address the most urgent matters already. Looking at what is already happening in terms of losses and damage. And that's why it's really important to start mapping these out. Having maybe some kind of visual aids through geospatial representation. If it's sea level rise and you're seeing villages being inundated, and then you're mapping it out, so then it validates those experiences. And then you bring it out to potential development partners. Hey, look, these are the front of the liners that really need support now. Then the next step is systemizing the support. Developing and strengthening your governance system. So adaptation and loss and damage support goes to where continued support is needed urgently, while over time providing the necessary support to, at the very least, help those that are most vulnerable cope. But with the end goal, with everybody thriving. I think if you keep that in mind, then I think we're on the right track.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Xavier. Tangaloa, I know you have worked in this climate change space for decades, and I'm not saying that to show your age, but what does a just future look like for the Pacific region through your eyes?
Thank you, Easton, and that is a really good question. For me, as a Pacific person, as a mother, also as a daughter and a child of the Pacific, a just future for me looks like a greener future, where transition, where the transition to greener technology means sustainability, and not just talking about sustainability, but real sustainable practices, technology, and building the capacity of Pacific people in addition to ensuring that the just transition supplies jobs, new skills for our people in that transition, but also I think more importantly is that the technology that comes into the Pacific in all of the partnerships that we will grow, also the burden is on the importers or those that develop the technology once it becomes redundant to remove it from our islands, to remove it from the Pacific, so that it remains the pristine Pacific that we expect to live in and we expect to hand down to our children and their children. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll come down to you now, Brianna. What's your take on a just future for the Pacific?
For me, a just future for the Pacific, I think I look generations down the line. So not my children, my great-grandchildren. And I hope that not only are they not in an apocalypse, but they're not preparing for one either. I hope that we can prepare now so that our young people have options, so that they have the option to stay, they have the option to leave with dignity, they have the option for green jobs, they have the option to build the Pacific that not only our young people deserve, but that this generation deserved too. Those that have already left their villages that didn't want to leave. I think that we can bring them a little bit of justice if their descendants have the option to stay. If their descendants, and I hope this does happen, have the option to go back. And I think that's the future I would like to see for us, is that we have options and our young people have the freedom to be the Pacific Islanders that our ancestors were.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. You're such an inspiring speaker. Oh. Anyway, I was going to ask you if you wanted to marry my son, but let's move on to you, Dr. Chris Bartlett. What's your take on a just future for the Pacific region?
Yeah, right. I think we need to start with something that's coming up very soon, and that's the COP negotiations. We will no longer accept any COP decisions that compromise the future of the Pacific. Our lives are not negotiable anymore. Finished. I also think we need to look at another international agreement that gets to the source of the climate problem, and that's fossil fuels. We have to agree to a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. And I think finally, it's time that we absolutely hold those responsible for the losses and damages, harm and injury that we have suffered accountable. It is high time that those countries that have been profiting for decades off of fossil fuels stand up and show us the money, give us the resources required so that we can address the loss and damage that they have caused.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that. And I know we could stay here and talk as long as we like, but we do have to put an end to this. And thank you so much for those responses. I'll hand it over now to Ed for our final remarks for tonight.
Thanks a lot, Esther, and thank you all panelists. Fa'afetai Telelava, to everyone here, and to all those who've stayed with us. Thank you to Mas for joining us for this powerful Talanoa and climate loss and damage. Today, we've heard from some of the Pacific's most courageous visionary leaders, negotiators, youth advocates, our regional experts, scientists, and community champions who are navigating rising tides with wisdom, resilience, and deep love for their people. This panel is part of a wider journey. Just days ago, the inaugural Pacific Youth Dialogue on Loss and Damage was held here in Samoa, guided by the theme, Navigating Our Futures. And now we stand in the midst of the Pacific Regional Loss and Damage Dialogue 2025, where governments, youth, civil society, academia, NGOs, and the private sector have come together to chart a collective path forward. We extend our heartfelt thanks to our panelists for their insights and leadership, and to our Pacific media team for amplifying these voices. This broadcast and the dialogue it reflects have been made possible through the support of the Loss and Damage Capability and Capacity Project and the Government of New Zealand.
Thank you so much for that, Eddie. And to our viewers across the Blue Pacific and beyond, thank you for joining us. We look forward to reporting the climate beat from our Pacific world. It is truly the story. It is really, truly the story of our lives. We would also like to acknowledge TV One Samoa and Pacifica TV, our partners in this broadcast tonight.
Soifua ma ia manuia. Thank you, Tumas. Until next time, we'll see you in Honiara for the Pacific Islands Forum meeting. Thank you.